Acts 7:42 and 43. Now, this is Stephen on trial. He's been talking to Sanhedrin about Moses, and he's working his way up to tell them about Christ. He's working the way through the Old Testament to point to Christ, which the Old Testament, we as Christians recognize that it points to Christ. And Stephen's just bringing this out to them so that they recognize Christ, who they're dying. We see how Stephen gets stoned because of this. Then God turned away from them, this is referring to Israelites, and gave them up and let them serve the sun, moon, and stars as their gods. In the book of Amos, prophecies the Lord God asks, was it to me you were sacrificing during those 40 years in the desert, Israel? So we see time and time again, not necessarily just with Moses. It did happen with Moses. We know the story of the golden calf, how they turned from God. Oftentimes during their times of prosperity is when they turned away from God. And then things got bad because they were away from God and they just turned further away from Him. Oftentimes, their religious, a very righteous leader, oftentimes the nation was righteous. It was oftentimes reflecting of the leader. We see Moses being a man who seeks after God, but it wasn't always that case. The people may have rebelled. We see how they do with Moses. But oftentimes a righteous leader did impact this. But we see how they turned away. Oftentimes, one of the main problems with them leaving the outsiders, the Canaanites, all these people in the land, is because these people had their gods. If they would have got rid of these people like God commanded them to, these pagan star, sun, moon, fertility worship, none of this would have been there for them to fall to. But the fact that they were their neighbors, kind of interaction with them instead of getting rid of them like they were supposed to, kind of allowed them to see things their way and kind of caused them to be tempted. Although while they were out in the wilderness, their falling away was simply because they didn't have faith, which it points down to that anyway. Even with them distractions of other people, if they would have stuck to their faith, they would have got rid of them people. But if they would have stayed strong to God, then they wouldn't have fell to it anyway. And that's how things are today, the same. If we stick to our faith, we ain't going to fall for these lies. If we keep our eyes on Him, we ain't going to fall to these pagan ideals and this apostate viewpoint of thinking. Verse 43. Know your real interest was in your heathen gods, Sukkot and the star god, Caraway, and all the images you made. So I will send you into captivity far beyond Babylon. Okay, I don't know why it says Sukkot, but Moloch is another term for it. So all these little idols, we see how it's in the historical books how the kings even submitted to these idols. We have a king of Israel, or I believe it's Israel, that actually sacrifices one of his children to Moloch. We see how which was practiced to worship Moloch. We see how all these leaders turned to the pagan gods and how the captivity happened because their refusal to turn back to God. We see also how they're kind of going through the tasks of serving God while they're serving these other pagan gods. But we also see at one point that the law is actually lost, and King Josiah finds it, which shows how far they were fallen. They didn't even know what the law was anymore. So Stephen's pretty much reminding them, you think you're so high and mighty. You think that the people you came from were so high and mighty. Look at where they truly came from. You're coming from a people that have refused to accept the Lord's ways. He's pretty much telling them, you're no different now. You're refusing who Christ is. You're rejecting His ways. You're rejecting Him as Lord. You say you follow the prophets and respect them, but your ancestors were the ones that killed them. Most of them were dead, and they did it was no different with them and Jesus. They had Him dead, killed. They claimed they respected the Lord's law and followed it, but the evidence showed different. We can go through all the motions to serve God, but if our heart isn't in it, then we're serving something else. Where our heart is what we're serving.